And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live here at Thanksgiving Eve. Joining me now, the man who tells you justice matters. It is the one and only former 30-year federal prosecutor. He was in the U.S. Army JAG. You see him on MSNBC. Please give it up for the one, the only, Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, how are you, brother?
Hey, I'm well. Dean, how are you?
Fine. That was your intro when we were at the comedy club together. Folks,
yeah,
you've seen this next guy on MSNBC.
I heard the wild applause. That was great.
Well, it's radio. You'd be like, you've seen this guy on MSNBC. You've heard him in the courtrooms around the country. He's here for you tonight. Please welcome the comedy stylings, legal stylings of the one and only Glenn Kirschner. You know, Glenn, my first comedy show ever was the funniest lawyer competition the New Jersey Bar Association put together when I was a lawyer. And they did it at a comedy club called Rascals in West Orange. And that was my first.
I remember Rascals. I hope you won because lawyers are not all that funny.
No, it wasn't. They called the funniest, but there was no award. It was just called the funniest lawyers, and we did. It was a lot of fun. I mean, then I got hooked on like, an addict. So from then on, it kind of went on. But it was a lot of fun doing that. I remember one of my jokes was about the time Sammy the Bull Gravano. He was like a 25-year associate of the Gotti family. I'm like, folks, you think it's tough to make part in your family? It took 25 years. The guy's still an associate. So
that's good. That's good.
Those are my lawyer jokes for. So let's talk about something people have been calling in, as you might imagine, the special counsel. First of all, though, before we get into anything about Merrick Garland, what can you tell us about Jack Smith, the person appointed to the special counsel?
So I don't know him personally, but some of my friends and former colleagues worked directly with him at the public integrity section at the Department of Justice. And so I tried to do my homework, and to a person, he is very highly regarded. And, you know, the good news is he is a real, without fear or favor kind of guy. He's very aggressive, very ethical, but he goes after Republican politicians. He goes after Democrats. He's gone after CIA officers. And here's what I like most, Dean. You know, he prosecuted Bob Menendez. He prosecuted Bob McDonnell, Virginia governor of Virginia. He prosecuted John Edwards, a senator who's a Democrat. He prosecuted an Arizona representative who's a Republican. And he won some cases and he lost some cases. More precisely, there were some hung juries, like in the Menendez and the Edwards case. But he keeps going after corrupt politicians. That is something of a rare trait in federal prosecutors, in my experience, because federal prosecutors typically only want to bring a case if they feel like they can't lose it, if it's so strong that it is darn near bulletproof. But, you know, Jack Smith, the picture that is emerging of him is he's going to try to hold these criminal politicians accountable, win, lose, or draw. And just as I always taught my homicide prosecutors when I was chief of homicide at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, it is far more important to try cases than to win cases. So give me a prosecutor who's willing to take the tough case to trial and lose it. Give me that person on my team every time.
That's great to hear. Look, I know this is speculative. The Mueller from appointment to report took about 23 months. And I saw something with Peter Strzok saying Robert Mueller did not start from scratch either. But at the same time, Peter Strzok was not being critical of anything. He was just sort of giving on Twitter a timeline. I mean, what's a fair amount of time? He's got two cases he's charged with handling. One is Mar-a-Lago documents, and second is the whole bucket of January 6th. I mean, what is a reasonable amount of time for him? He's a very thorough prosecutor. I've heard great things about him, like you're sharing with us. It seems like it's going to take a while. Yeah.
So it's going to take a little bit of time. And, you know, we're just going to have to bear with Jack Smith and his team. But here's the thing. The Mueller investigation may not have started from scratch, but what was the first thing Bob Mueller had to do? He had to go out and hire, you know, a whole battalion of prosecutors. Some of my former colleagues were on the Mueller team. He had to hire support staff. He really did have to stand up an office. And he largely had to start from jump with respect to investigating all things Trump, Russia. Now, I think Jack Smith is in an entirely different circumstance. He was handed two investigations, the theft and unlawful concealment of classified documents and national defense information at Mar-a-Lago, and the insurrection. Those investigations, Dean, have been up and running for a very long time, and Jack Smith was put in place to continue to move those forward. And listen, if there's any indication that he is trying to move this thing at light speed. Just today in the New York Times, we saw the reporting, I'm sure you're going to get there, of the fact that they now want an interview. DOJ wants an interview with Mike Pence. You know, we didn't hear anything about that until Jack Smith was appointed special counsel, which was only 5 days ago. So I think maybe Merrick Garland was too much judge and not enough prosecutor, but Jack Smith is all prosecutor, and there will be no foot dragging. There will be no legal navel gazing or analysis paralysis or deep circumspection, you know, before you make a prosecutorial decision. I think we're going to see the pace of this investigation accelerate and accelerate pretty significantly.
When you were on a few weeks ago, let's play the clip. No, we're not going to play the clip. You said the idea that appointing special counsel now, the essence was it's going to delay things, and that we need justice now, no longer delays. Has your mind changed because of Jack Smith?
So here is, in part, my mind changed because when I saw the appointment of Jack Smith, and maybe we should go back and roll the tape, because I know one of the things I said, maybe not with you, Dean, but somewhere, is the only way I can see it not delaying matters is if Jack Smith is simply inserted over the top of this probe that has been ongoing for a very long time, and he just takes the teams that are in place and he takes the evidence that's been developed and he runs with it rather than starting from scratch. Because he could have said, listen, I need to now assemble my own team of agents, of prosecutors, and of support staff. That would have delayed things considerably. I still think there may be some delay, but here's where I've landed, Dean.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't go any slower than zero. And what we saw was Merrick Garland seemed to be moving at a snail's pace, if not in reverse sometimes. It's been going on 2 years since Donald Trump launched an attack on our democracy, and not a single suit of the insurrection, not a planner, an organizer, a funder, or an inciter has been held accountable. Lots of the boots of the insurrection have been held accountable. And I just spent 7 weeks watching the Oath Keepers trial. So, but I have a feeling that Merrick Garland, as I say, was too much judge and not enough prosecutor. Dean, he was a prosecutor, including in my former office, the DC U.S. Attorney's Office, but that was more than a quarter of a century ago. In the 24 years he was on the bench, judges, they like to look and look and look and look before they leap and act. And I think that was the person Merrick Garland became as a judge, and he carried it with him to what should have been a prosecutorial job as the Attorney General in our nation's sort of, hour of need. So I think this may, and maybe I'm contradicting myself from a few weeks ago, I think given what we've seen, this is likely to speed the pace up.
And I'm chatting with Glenn Kirschner. No, you're consistent in that, like yourself, myself, we've talked about this for a year and a half, that where are the charges? Come on, Merrick Garland. Nothing's changed in our impatience for justice, and delaying justice here has led to the worst case scenario. The guy's running for president again when he should be in a courtroom. The only thing he should be announcing is his lunch selection in the prison cafeteria. That's all Trump should be announcing, but instead he's running for president. So we have to deal with all of that. So look, there's nothing more we can do. We can't go back in time. I don't have the DeLorean from Back to the Future to go back and change things. We have to live here with this. And this is the hand that we're dealt with. And it's actually a really good hand, except for the timing. Like if this was a year ago, I think we'd probably both be saying, well, that's a great move, and maybe it wraps up right now, right? And we'd be getting a report and some indictments happening after this. So what I wanted to touch on, what you touched on slightly here. New York Times reporting the Department of Justice reportedly reached out to former Vice President Pence's legal team seeking Pence's witness testimony. And it's part of the criminal investigation. Can you tell people why this is completely different than the January 6th committee wanted to talk to him and he was able just to go like, no, I'm really not want to do that?
Well, he was only to say, I don't want to do that because they didn't subpoena him and they didn't push the issue. So, and I'll be talking about this precise topic with Lawrence O'Donnell tonight on MSNBC. And here's my read on it. A few days ago, we saw the reporting that Mike Pence told the J6 committee that he is closing the door on testifying to the January 6th committee about the crimes of Donald Trump, about Donald Trump's attempt to remain in power unlawfully and unconstitutionally. Donald Trump's attempt to destroy our democracy. Mike Pence just decided he would close the door on telling the January 6th committee what he knows about all of that, which is deeply unpatriotic and cowardly. But guess what, Dean? Now that we know the Department of Justice will be interviewing him, you can't close the door on a grand jury subpoena. Jack Smith is kicking that door wide open, right off the hinges, it looks like. But let's talk about next steps, because the reporting thus far is DOJ wants to interview Mike Pence. Mike Pence can continue to do the unpatriotic thing and say, I decline a voluntary interview. He can do that because the FBI cannot compel an interview. The Department of Justice, federal prosecutors cannot compel an interview. You know who can? The grand jury. So if Mike Pence declines, which will be further evidence of his cowardice, then I promise you the next step will be a grand jury subpoena, because you can't decline a grand jury subpoena. Now, here's the other thing people might not know. I've subpoenaed hundreds and hundreds of people in my years as a prosecutor. When you subpoena somebody, that's a court order. It says you must appear and testify before the grand jury. Once you're in there, if you have a viable privilege, attorney-client, Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, executive privilege, you can assert it on a question-by-question basis, but you must appear and testify. But here's the thing you don't have to do. When I subpoenaed somebody and they came to the grand jury, I always made a request. I said, would you like to have a voluntary interview first so we can feel each other out? You know, the questions that are coming, I know the answers that you'll be giving. It makes for a much smoother grand jury presentation, but I could not compel somebody to do that. And I had plenty of people, Dean, say, nope, I want to go right into the grand jury. I would say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Let's get in there and do it. And then I would wear them out in the grand jury, because it was truly an investigative interview, because I had no idea what they were going to say. So I might keep them in there for 8 hours. So we'll see how Mike Pence plays it moving forward. Will he continue to do the unpatriotic and cowardly thing, you know, and push it to the grand jury? Or will he begin to realize that maybe it's time he do something to help repair our democracy?
We'll see how this plays out. And I imagine Mike Pence's decision will be informed, at least in part, by his ambitions to be the GOP nominee for president in 2024. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, something else has happened, and it's not, we were waiting for the attacks by Trump and his allies on Jack Smith, but now they're going after his wife, because I guess they can't go after him just yet, or they can't find things. But like Trump did with Andy McCabe's wife, and we all remember that he smeared Andy McCabe's wife. Andy McCabe was FBI director at the time. Now they're going after his wife, Jack Smith's wife, Katie, that she was a producer on Becoming. It was a documentary about Michelle Obama, and she donated $2,000 to Joe Biden's 2020 campaign. And even Congressman Andy Clyde, who's just a vile person in the House, said, you just can't make this stuff up. Katie Shivane, the wife of Jack Smith, the special counsel to go after President Trump, donated to Joe Biden's campaign and produced Michelle Obama's documentary. America cannot stand with a corrupt two-tier justice system. Unsurprising, but when you hear this garbage, what's your reaction?
My reaction is, this is who the Republican Party is, right? You can't attack the message. You can't undermine the evidence of Donald Trump's guilt. So you attack the messenger and the messenger's family. So I expect they'll go after Jack Smith's wife, maybe kids, maybe Jack's pets, you know, who knows? Because this is all they have. They don't have anything to undermine this this is a fast-moving train at this point. And I say that with a little bit of optimism, because goodness knows the train, I don't even feel like it left the station under Merrick Garland's tenure. And now Merrick Garland has completely handed this off to Jack Smith, and it feels like things are moving forward. The Republicans can't stop this evidentiary train from moving forward, so they have to try to go after the train conductor or the people who keep the, tracks in good repair. And they're going to fail. They're going to fail because they're small and they're weak, and they don't have truth or dignity or decency or justice on their side. So they're going to fail.
And Andy Clyde, if people don't know him, I interviewed Michael Fanone just last week, the former Metropolitan Police officer. And in his book and in our conversation, he talked about Andy Clyde, who would not even shake his hand, the Republican congressman, and he voted against giving the the medal to the police officers who protected our democracy in peril of their life and limb. And he pointed out Andy Clyde as being one of the most despicable people. And here's Andy Clyde doing what Trump's bidding, attacking Jack Smith's wife, not even Jack Smith. There's no bottom, Glenn. It's an abyss.
You know what?
It's a bottomless abyss.
And I think with Jack investigating Trump's criminal responsibility for the insurrection, he can't help but also, investigate the possible complicity of members of Congress. So why do you think these congressmen have their panties in a bunch? Because some of them asked for pardons, Dean, for their own criminal complicity in what happened on January 6th. Jack Smith, of necessity, has to investigate that as part of, I think, his mandate to investigate the insurrection.
And I hope that happens. So chatting with Glenn Kirschner, former federal prosecutor, you see him all the time on MSNBC. In fact, you can see him tonight with Lawrence O'Donnell, as he mentioned, 10 p.m. Eastern time. So you were at the Oath Keepers trial for weeks. I saw you covering it live. You were doing stand-ups outside of the courthouse there, talking about what's going on. Right now, the jury is deliberating the case. What is your sense? And I'm not going to go through 7 weeks of testimony in a case, but what's your sense overall about how the case went in and how good the chances are for prosecution, the state, the government in this case, to get a conviction?
Yeah, so no case is a sure thing. I learned that in my 30 years as a prosecutor, but I will say the evidence was very strong and it was expertly tried. Now, I may be a little bit biased because it was my friends and former colleagues that were trying the case. The two lead prosecutors, Catherine Rakosi and Jeff Nestler, were in the homicide section. In fact, I tried Kate's first murder case with her. These people are the gold standard of public servants. And, we do sort of lay into the Department of Justice at times. But what I would like the American people to know is they were extraordinarily well represented in this seditious conspiracy trial against the Oath Keepers. The prosecution's evidence was really strong. They had countless incriminating messages from the defendants in their own words. They had text messages, Facebook posts, signal chats. They had video of these people breaching the Capitol and thereafter bragging about how, quote, we took the Capitol. They had a cooperating witness that the prosecution presented who said, we had an implicit agreement that we had to stop the certification of Joe Biden's win by any means necessary. The evidence was really strong, but it was also fairly complicated, and there was a lot of it. So here's what I will warn everybody. When you have these lengthy trials with multiple defendants, I did, for example, in that same courthouse, a 6-month-long RICO trial with 6 defendants. Wow. And then what happened when the jury finally deliberated for a couple of weeks and started to reach some verdicts? What they did was they reached all of their verdicts against defendant number 1. They came out, they announced them. Then they went back and deliberated another few days, came out, delivered all their verdicts on defendant number 2. This took weeks. So what I would warn people is don't expect a quick verdict against all these defendants. It's going to develop over time unless they are so persuaded that they took a straw poll and they said, you know what, it's overwhelming. The defense presentations were not terribly compelling. Let's just bang these people out and vote them guilty and go home. I think it's going to be a pretty long, drawn-out deliberation process.
And the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, the leader, what's his real name? You call him?
Elmer. Elmer is his real name.
Elmer Rhodes. But these guys are charged with, among other things, seditious conspiracy. Obviously, Donald Trump is not charged in any way. But does a conviction in this case, how does it impact, do you think, DOJ as a practical matter in potential charge against Donald Trump, if at all?
I think it helps them more with the upcoming seditious conspiracy trials. This is only half of the Oath Keepers. That stack that we all saw sort of infamously going into the Capitol with their hands on one another's shoulders in full battle dress uniform, trying to stop the certification. That was only half of the defendants were tried in this case. The other half will be tried in an upcoming seditious conspiracy case. We have the Proud Boys. They will be tried in yet another seditious conspiracy case. So I think it will be really important as what I call atmospheric precedent if the jury convicts this first batch of defendants charged with seditious conspiracy. It will be helpful because more defendants may choose to plead guilty moving forward. I don't know that it directly impacts the Department of Justice's thinking about what to charge Donald Trump with. But listen, if there are a bunch of seditious conspiracy convictions, attempt to violently overthrow the government or violently try to stop the certification of Joe Biden's win, I think that will help build momentum to hold accountable the person who ordered the attack. And that was Donald Trump.
Absolutely. And very last thing, I found this so curious. Reporting in the Times, I think it was the Times that broke it. The New York District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who had decided, we all learned, to not go to a grand jury to indict Donald Trump over the hush money payments made to Stormy Daniels before the election, that Michael Cohen partly went to jail for that. And then there was a lot of backlash, and Alvin Bragg's office, the DA, was like, oh no, it's not closed, but it was dormant. We thought it was dead. And now reporting that they are re-examining it, potentially reviving it. What is going on?
This is a head scratcher, Dean. I don't understand why Alvin Bragg has made any of the decisions he's made. I hate to second guess prosecutors because I don't know all of the evidence that he has available to make his decisions. But, his decision to kill the investigation into Donald Trump when his career prosecutors said they had enough not only to indict but convict him, and he killed that investigation and chose only to go to trial against Alan Weisselberg, his chief financial officer, and the Trump organization. It feels like there's a whole lot of egg on Alvin Bragg's face because there's some testimony that's been developed during the trial of the Trump organization, testimony given by, I think, Alan Weisselberg and maybe Jeff McConney, another high officer in the Trump organization, that Trump knew all of this. Trump basically is guilty of all of this. So all of a sudden, what do we see? We see Alvin Bragg poking his nose back up underneath the justice tent and saying, wait, we're reinvigorating the hush money payments crimes, and we may indict Donald Trump for those. First of all, I'll believe it when I see it. And second of all, I think there's a curiosity here. Let me plant the seed. Right after Jack Smith was appointed to take some of the criminal investigations into Donald Trump take over, all of a sudden, Alvin Bragg says, oh, yeah, we're back on the Stormy Daniels hush money payments. I find the timing of it curious. But beyond that, I don't know what motivates Alvin Bragg. So we're going to have to wait to see.
Well, Glenn, I appreciate your time, especially on Thanksgiving Eve, my friend. I wish you and your family a great, healthy, happy Thanksgiving. I appreciate, let me express my gratitude, Thanksgiving Eve, my appreciation to you for coming on the show and sharing your insight. You make us all smarter. I sincerely, personally appreciate it. I know listeners do as well. So thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Dean. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Take care, my friend.